Hey guys, Double Wide 6, and today I'm working on this bad boy. It's 26 horsepower, zero turn. I think it's called a ZT-60, and it has these hydro gear transaxles, and the left transaxle isn't working properly. It only works in reverse. It's not working in forward. And from what I've found online, that means that one of the check valves isn't seating and the fluid's getting past it. So we're going to open that up and take a look for it. Hopefully that's our problem and we get this thing back on the lawn. Okay, I got my lift table under the transmission. And these are our last two nuts. I think if I lower this, we should be able to get that out. That's it. It's loose. Before you remove the unit, it's probably easiest to remove the oil. So you can pull off the oil filter cover, which you can see right here, and remove the oil filter and catch all the oil. I drained the other one and then I just put the filter back on so that it wouldn't just keep dripping. Here's a look at the unit up on the bench. You can see here it's a ZT-2800. This unit's made by Hydro Gear, so they have a sticker here. So there's the model number on this unit. I think it's very similar to the 3100. And you can get these units, they're about 800 bucks or so to replace one. And as you saw when I took it apart, it's only about really like 6, maybe 8 nuts and bolts to pop the unit out. So it's definitely easier just to do a direct replacement. Generally what happens with these things is the center section in here goes bad. And that causes it, after about a half an hour, you start losing your hydro on one side because there's two separate units. But this unit, what we're thinking the issue is going to be is the check valves. So in the center section in the unit, we'll take a look at those check valves and we'll see if one has backed out. At this point, we're just going to show you how to take this apart. I cleared off my bench and I set up an area over here where I can put all the parts, so that's what we're going to do. First piece I'm going to take apart is going to be this speed and direction control arm, and that has a T40 Torx, so I'm just going to pop that out. This whole unit should just pop off. There we go. Next thing we're going to do is remove our fan and our pulley. It's a 3/4 inch hex bolt, I think. Impact makes that pretty easy. And this whole assembly comes right off. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is remove a snap ring. This was right under that pulley. There we go. Okay, while I'm working on this side, this is our bypass arm. So there's a clip here that we're going to have to kind of fight up. There we go. And it appears that there's a snap ring under here. So we'll take that guy out as well. There we go. Now we're looking at the brake lever. They have a little clip on here that slips off, and this is a splined connection. It goes with this recess towards the body. Okay, so I think I removed everything externally that I need to. So now I'm just going to crack the case. To crack open the case, they have some inserts where you can just get a screwdriver in here. There's one there, and there's one over on this side. And we should be in here. Oh, there we go. Alright. We can see there's a bunch of gears. These gears come right out. You want to watch your washers and stuff and keep track of where they go. And in here's our center section. So we're going to have to remove these bolts to get that. There's no timing or anything on this unit. Couple washers on here. Just take them off so I don't lose them. Alright, so I'm going to remove the oil pump. And there's an O-ring in here along with the oil pump mechanism. So we'll get that out of there. And then there's these rubber / metal inserts. So down in here is these metal and rubber inserts, and what I did last time I was in one of these is I used a bolt like this with a head and tried to grab underneath it and wiggle it out, and it's pressed in there with a little bit of rubber, so you gotta just keep fiddling around with it until you get it to unseat. You're not going to hurt anything. And these parts are replaceable if you screw them up. I think I could probably get it with the pliers here. There we go. That's what they look like. They're metal and then they're encased in rubber. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to work on the center section. There's a pin in here you need to pull up and out of the way. That's for the that pin's for the bypass. So we slip that out. Next thing we're going to do is pull the shaft out. I'm just going to tap it. There we go. And that pushed right out that seal. Looks like we need a new seal here. So we'll get that seal out. And there's the whole shaft. Alright, so I think, yeah, we're free and we can move out this center section, I believe. There we go. Now there's a bunch of little pistons and springs. You want to try not to knock any of these things out of here and keep them in the same spot, but unless you do that every day, that's not the easiest thing to do. But they're all the same size. There we go. So all this is out of here, and this is the bypass pin, which we don't want to lose. There's a bearing in there. Pull that out. Bypass pin. One of these is a pump and one's a motor. This is the center section, and under these plugs is where we're trying to get to. There we go. But my transmission, as I said, the problem is it works in reverse but not forward, and the problem should be down here. So we're going to pull out these check valves and see what's going on here. So if you look really closely here, there's these little rectangles. You poke through those rectangles and you can pull off this cover or plug. So you poke it through like that, and then you pop it out. And if you look in here, here's what you see. There's this nut and the bypass valve, and guess what? It's loose. So that's our problem, and that's why this unit's not working. I'll pop out the other one, and you'll see that the nut's going to be tight, because that's the side that's working. So if you're having an issue, I can tell you that this valve here, this controls the forward motion, and this one down here on this side is the reverse. So let me pop this one out. So we'll get in there. And you can see the difference here. This valve's seated and tight. That's the way that's supposed to look. And this one, this nut is loose, and what happens is the fluid goes through those threads here and it bypasses. You can see the whole valve here. So at least we found our problem, and it made taking this thing apart worthwhile. Okay guys, back next day here, and I just got done taking this apart. I clamped these flats in my vise, and I took a adjustable wrench, backed out this spring, and there's a little tip in here, and I just made sure everything was clear and in working order, and I reassembled it. And now I replaced this O-ring because it was a little bit damaged, and I'm gonna put both these valves back in, and we're gonna start reassembly. Okay, I got the check valves back in there, and these plugs, I'm reusing them, and I noticed that they were sticking out about the thickness of a US dime, about like that. There's a little bit of a recess around them, so I'm just keeping that shoulder about where it was. Alright, that should be good. They can't back out because they're going to back out into the side of the case. Before I put this back together, I figured I'd just take a minute to talk a little bit about what goes bad. And we're looking at the center section here, and there's two different piston blocks. Okay? You have a smaller one. The smaller one is what runs your pump, and the bigger one is going to run your wheel motor. And what you want to look at is this surface here should be machined perfectly flat. You could see where the spring-loaded pistons run on here, and you could see, you know, there's no grooves, but you can actually see where they run. It's perfectly smooth. And same with this side, it's perfectly smooth. The surface where it mates with that on this block here, you can tell it's like a mirrored finish, nice and smooth. All these pistons I had out, there's springs in them. They shouldn't wobble. If you have fluid getting past these, you're going to lose power, but these seat in here are real nice and look good. So what we're going to do is reassemble this unit at this point. We're ready for reassembly. First thing that goes in is the bearing. So this is nice and lubed up. That goes right in the back, just like that. And we're going to take our shaft. The shaft has a spline which slips right on this wheel motor, so that should kind of lock in. And then we want to line this shaft up with the hole in the back of the case and get that to seat properly. There we go. And we now have, yeah, that shaft's in there. There's a little bit of oil in there and the spring, so it's kind of pushing out a little bit. Okay guys, so now that I have that wheel motor in, I moved it up to my vise and I've positioned it kind of upside down. And right here I have the bypass pin. And what I'm doing is I'm putting some grease on that to help hold it in here. And what we want to do is take the bypass pin inserted in here properly. And we're going to insert this unit on here once I figure out how it goes in. I think it goes in here this way. So there's the pin. You could hold it possibly with your finger, but looks like that grease will hold it pretty well. And at this point we're ready to lock down the center section. So I'm just going to grab the bolts. Okay, I got the bolts in, and what I want to do is just get a couple turns on them. I'm not going to seat this thing all the way. You just want to make sure that these pistons and springs are like spring loaded. You can see how I can push them down. If they bind up, they're not seated properly in the wheel motor. So I just want to get this down low enough so I can get a couple turns on each of these bolts. And we're going to work these down just gradually, each one a little bit at a time. Alright, so I snugged those bolts down, but I didn't torque them. The next step, we're going to install the swash plate, and this has a bearing in here, so that's all set. And this square end's going to go down towards the bottom, and it looks like we need to get our pump in here. The pistons are going to go against this, so we'll hold this kind of like that and try and line everything up. There we go. And what we want to do is carefully try and lower this guy into place, and if you just compress those pistons, you should be able to drop it down in here. Oh, that looks pretty good. Yeah, there's a lot of spring pressure there, so just take your time putting these things in. There we go. That shaft comes all the way through and actually comes out the other side to the oil pump here. So everything's looking good in there. Okay, while I have this in the vise, I'm going to torque these guys down to about 300 inch-pounds. So I'm just going to do this in stages. And the book said to keep it at the lower end. I think it was 280 to 400 inch-pounds. So right here is about 330. They were in there pretty tight. Moved it back over to the bench here, and now what we're doing is we're working on the input shaft, and I'm just following the diagram, and I'm going to get this oil seal back in here. So there's a washer and the seal, and there's a spring in here. I'm just making sure that that thing's seated properly. So we'll try and work this on here. Nice and even. That looks good. Yeah, that seated nice. And now what we need is our snap ring. And yeah, these jobs are a lot easier with snap ring pliers, so can invest in a decent pair of these. There we go. So that snap ring, that looks seated properly. That'll hold that oil seal in there. Okay, I flipped the unit over. Now we're working on putting back together. I've been calling this the oil pump because it's a lot like an oil pump on an engine. But it's actually called the charge kit. So we'll put in these rubber inserts. They're metal and rubber, and they're just a press fit and lock in here. You'll feel them lock in. And then there's an O-ring. That's just going to go right there. And then you got the charge kit. So these two should just interlock. There's no real top or bottom. As long as they're inside each other, they should work fine. And the bottom of the charge kit, if this gets reversed, it's going to screw up something. So they said in the manual to mark it, I put a 0 here and a 0 there. So we're just going to kind of go through this and align it. Okay, we're on to the bypass arm. So the way this goes in, this end, the smaller end, goes in to the engine. So we'll slip that guy in, and it should seat down in there. So you just spin it till it seats a little bit, and then according to the drawing, you do the snap ring next. And the snap ring's going wrong there. Here, it's this one. So slip that one in there. Missed it. I think I need a little help from a screwdriver. There we go. That's it. There we go. And now we'll put on the arm. And this retaining clip, I just put on my vise and flattened out to kind of reshape it. And I think if we use a socket, we should be able to slip it on here. That's it. Alright, happy with that. Now we're ready to put the gears back in the unit. This first gear, there's two washers. The thin washer will go on here. The bigger washer, or the little thicker washer but the smaller diameter, goes on the outside. So you put on the thin washer, and then you put on the gear, and then the snap ring goes, and then on the outside of the snap ring will be this washer. Next up, there's a spacer, a large gear, and a small spacer. So the bigger spacer is kind of recessed and only fits in there one way. Then we have our main gear, and then there's a spacer that will go on the outside. Next up, on this shaft here, there's already a washer that stayed on there. So it's a real thin washer, just like this. So that's on. And then this gear. And then this gear, I can tell it was on here this way from the looks of things. So I'm just trying to get that gear to mesh here and there like that. And then that washer goes on the outside. Okay guys, so I think we're ready to put the case back on. I've cleaned up all this surface. I blew out these holes. I cleaned them with brake clean. I took all the bolts, cleaned them on a wire brush, and cleaned them off with brake clean too. So what I want to do is put a bead of RTV around here, and then we can put the case back on this unit. Now what I want to do is install this in the tractor, and I want to run, I want to like cut the lawn with it for like an hour, and then I'm going to drain the oil out and change the filter, because there is going to be a little bit of particulate in there no matter how clean you are. Alright, so I went through, I put on the RTV. I should mention there's a dowel pin here, and there's another dowel pin here. These didn't pull out of the case, but you want to be careful that yours don't. And I went through and I oiled all of these components, and I drizzled a little bit of oil down there. And what I want to do is put the case on, let it sit for a day or two, and at that point, we're going to add the oil. Alright, I waited about 15. Yeah, it's a little tacky. So, try and put this guy on. We're now going to put on the fan pulley. This is all together. There's splines on here and a lock nut. It's a 3/4 inch lock nut. Now to prevent it from spinning, I'm going to try and grab it with some vice grips. Alright guys, last day of this project. We're going to put in the speed and control arm. So this assembly, there's a torque screw or bolt up top, and then you just rotate it and get it to fit on that pin there like that, and we'll torque that guy down. Alright guys, this is the moment of truth. So first step, now that I have this back in the unit, it's filled up with 77 ounces of 20W50 synthetic, and now what we want to do is purge the air out of the system. So we're going to run it slow, and we're going to move the sticks forward and back with the bypass on, so it's in bypass mode. Then we'll put it in drive mode, do the same thing at a slow speed, and hopefully by that point it purges out the air. Alright guys, so I've cut most of the yard with the machine. I got a pretty good sized hill here, so I'm going to go and cut on this hill. We'll show you how the unit's working. It's been doing a great job, no issues, no leaks, and I'm just going to run it here, and while it's hot I'm going to change the oil on both sides, put on new oil filters, and that'll wrap this one up. A little later in the afternoon, I got the machine cleaned up and everything back together. I cut the entire lawn, as you can see, and we got a bunch of rolling hills out here, so it did a nice job on the hills. I ran it for about close to an hour, and you know, the transmission had no issues whatsoever, and both sides were working quite well. I'm not really familiar with these bad boy mowers. I've worked on a few of them, and I can tell you that they're pretty well designed, meaning they're easy to work on, and the metal's pretty thick, and yeah, I kind of like them. I think they're nice. This is meant to be a residential mower, and yeah, what it comes down to is the metal's pretty thick, the engine's decent, and the only drawback on these things are it doesn't have separate wheel motors and pumps, but you know, it has this hydro gear unit, which is pretty easy to fix. I think this one took me about 4 hours. Most dealers don't fix them because it takes, you know, 4 or 5 hours to get it done till you figure out what parts are needed and all that and get it back together. And you know, there's that risk factor of doing all the work and then it not working. so it's just easier to replace the unit. But if you're doing it yourself and you take your time, it's not that hard to do. So I'll put some links down below to all the parts that you can use for projects like this. It's mainly that center section in these transaxles that give you problems. I've done a few of them. So thanks for watching, and keep your eyes open for a future video on, I think I'll probably do a little walk around on this mower and you know, give you more of my opinion on the bad boy machine. Thanks for watching, guys, and don't forget to comment. Take care.